Hello, creatures, and welcome to the Slasher Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Ashley, and tonight's episode is sure to be a killer time. Before we get into it, I want to thank you all for tuning into the first ever episode of the Slasher Dreams podcast. But I don't want to waste any time, so we're going to start and get right into our first segment, which is Creature Questions. I have next to me a jar full of questions, both asked by people I know in real life because this is the first episode, and a few questions we got from viewers on our Twitter. I'll draw 3 random questions asked by listeners, and I'll answer them. But don't worry, if you submitted a question and you did not hear it in this episode, or you didn't get an answer, your question is going to be staying in the jar, and we will be answering it in later episodes. And we will be adding into the jar, we'll be mixing it up just to make sure that your questions that were asked, months ago aren't always at the bottom. We'll figure out a way to make it so that everybody has a chance to potentially get their question answered, and if you stick around long enough, maybe your question will get answered. If you want to submit questions for Creature Questions, you can go to the Slasher Dream Pod, turn on notifications to our site, and wait for us to post a post asking for questions for the segment, and you can comment your questions on that post. Without further ado, let's get into our first segment, Creature Questions. Question number 1. Your dream horror game, what would it be? My dream horror game, that's a good question. I'd like a sandbox slasher type thing, where you can set up like a location, and it's kind of like an asymmetrical horror game, except there's no like win goal. It's basically just like a role-play game. You'd be able to have like multiple killers, multiple survivors, or just one killer and one survivor, and you'd be able to like kind of put together your own horror films within the game. I think that'd be a really interesting and unique way of doing it, and it would kind of flip that whole goal-based asymmetrical nature that a lot of horror games have, because instead of like, a killer just trying to kill survivors, a survivor just trying to survive killers, it's an entire community that can kind of come together and create scenes. It would hugely boom the roleplay videos that would come out on YouTube. Like you'd have people making parodies of real life slasher flicks. You'd have people creating their own, and I would love for the game to have like this community tab, kind of like how WWE 2K does, where you can insert images and create your own killers. So like some people could probably make like licensed killers like Freddy and Jason and put them in the community creations tab, or they could make their own killers. I think that would be a really fun way of going about that. I think it could be interesting. I think it could build a community that is completely centered around bringing to life like the most creative aspects of the horror community. You can have game modes like you think of it like an imposters game mode, or like an Among Us game mode, where you have like 2 Ghostface-esque killers and a group of survivors, and nobody knows who Ghostface is, and they can change in and out of costumes for like quote-unquote hunting of the survivors. I think there's a lot of things you could do with it. You can make a giant like world map where it's like a small town, maybe there's a city off in the distance, you can like drive to it, make it immersive. I think there's a fun way to go about doing that, and I think it would be a really interesting type of game. I've talked about it before on Twitter. I think overall there's a lot of potential in sandbox games that are built with the sole aspect of allowing people to express their own creativity. And don't get me wrong, I love other types of games. Like, this isn't just like the end-all be-all for me. I mean, Supermassive Games, the people who made Until Dawn, I would love for them to make like a Scream game where your choices impact who the killer is, and it's like ever changing, if they can find a way to make that make sense. I would like a Outlast style game, maybe set in the world of like, I don't know, Halloween or something, where like you're running from Michael throughout the entirety of the game through a facility. I think that could be really good. I think that could be incredibly interesting. There's a lot of really cool games and ideas for games that I've had that I'd love to see. I doubt any of them will ever happen, but I do believe that overall there's a lot of room for just the most creative ideas possible, and all it takes is people to actually care about these properties and about these titles and about these characters. And I think there's a lot you can do with that space. I think gaming has like there's a lot of really good original horror games, but I don't think gaming has fully tapped into the licensed nature in the way they could. Like every licensed horror game we've had, for the most part, has been like asymmetrical. At least to my knowledge, because I know you have games like Alien Isolation, which isn't asymmetrical, but then you have like Friday the 13th, the game, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the game, Evil Dead, the game, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Like, all of those games have been asymmetrical, and the majority of those have actually failed. And I think there's just way too much, like, there's way too much pushing it towards that direction. I wish we could expand the horizons for which horror games are developed, especially licensed horror games. I think it would do some justice to the genre, to franchises that are in the genre, and overall to horror itself, to kind of broaden the horizon of games and game types we get within licensed horror. Let's move on to question 2. Thank you for that question, by the way. Horror comic recommendations. That's a really good one. There's quite a few. I mean, if you really want to get into like universal lore, there's the Alien and Predator comics that go into Xenomorph and Yautja lore. You can learn about a ton of different Yautja within their culture, and you can meet characters like the Hive War Predator. If you play the video games, you can learn about Prince, who is really fucking cool, and then of course there's the Predator films. But the comics, they go into so many different tribes from the Predator's species known as the Yautja. And there's just, it's such a rich lore to it. And xenomorphs are no different. You can find tons of different subspecies because of their, adaptability to different species whenever a facehugger implants a xenomorph embryo within another species. You can really get into some really interesting, sometimes really creepy stories. There's a metric fuck ton of licensed comics for Friday the 13th and Halloween. I mean, there's even been comics where Jason fights Leatherface, and that's cool. I mean, there's the Marvel adaptation of The Dark Tower. Those are pretty good. I'd have to say my favorite horror comic is an ongoing series at the moment called Something is Killing the Children. It centers around a character named Erica Slaughter from the House of Slaughter, who is a grown woman who, when she was younger, witnessed a nightmare/monster kill her parents, and she was adopted by this kind of community that hunts monsters, and she's now like one of the best hunters in the faction of the House of Slaughter that are known as Black Masks. They are people within the community that hunt independently of the rest of the community. And it's a very good series. The art is gorgeous, the story is interesting, the characters are likable. Erica Slaughter is probably one of my favorite characters in all of horror comics. I think she is incredibly interesting. She looks badass. She is badass. Every aspect of her is just cool as fuck. But yeah, that's a really good one. If you want a comic with like insanely good art, I'd say James Tyrion's The Deviant. The art in that comic is absolutely insane. The way they capture darkness in a lot of areas is absolutely like jaw-dropping. Like, there's a panel in the first issue where the killer is like inside of, like, it's nighttime, the killer is like in a blizzard, and you see them, like, their silhouette, and the way that they capture the darkness around the silhouette is it's fucking haunting. It is legitimately one of the creepiest comics that I think I've seen in terms of slasher. But yeah, those are some really good recs. If you want any more recommendations, always feel free to ask again. I can always look through all of my comics that I have in here and try to find some more recommendations. But off the top of my head, those are some good ones. Okay, let's get to question number 3. Hey Ash, underrated slasher film from the 80s? That's a good one. I'd have to say, if you're looking for an underrated slasher film, I know it's probably not underrated enough for some people, but it's underrated to me because I never see it get the love it properly deserves. My Bloody Valentine, the 1981 version of the film, I think that movie is incredibly underrated. I think that the Miner as a slasher should have been much larger than he was. I think the concept of him is should be as big as, like, Jason, Michael, and Leatherface. I know that may sound silly to some people, but I genuinely believe that had he been done right, the Miner could have been Ghostface before Ghostface was Ghostface. And we're going to get into spoilers here, so if you haven't seen My Bloody Valentine, 1981 or 2009, just, I don't know, maybe mute, go watch, or pause, go watch those movies, and then come back. But the reason I say that is because, multiple people have worn the mantle of the Miner. And I think the idea of him being, like, the original Ghostface is very interesting, because I feel like he could be a killer that, haunts Valentine's Bluff every so often with another individual behind the mask. I feel like that could have very well been him. And I feel like he could have been Ghostface before Ghostface was Ghostface. Because in the 1981 film, 2 people wear the mantle. You have Harry Warden and then Axel Palmer, and then, of course, you have Tom Hanniger in the 2009 reboot. And that level of mantle, that's already 3 people in 2 films that have been the Miner. And, of course, Harry Warden was shown as the Miner in the 2009 reboot at the beginning. So technically you've got 2 versions of Harry Warden, you've got Tom Hanniger, and then you've got Axel Palmer from the 1981 film. I love both of those movies. I love them very much, and I know that the 2009 reboot isn't looked on as fondly, but overall, I think that movie is just as fun. It's definitely not as good as the 1981 version, but it's definitely fun, and I think that it gets way too much hate. I'm cautiously optimistic about Blumhouse's reboot that's coming, because apparently they're making a reboot. If you've been following me for a decent amount of time, you know that Blumhouse isn't necessarily my favorite studio. They made the Halloween trilogy that I absolutely love with all of my heart. And they've made other movies that I like, but they've also made some movies that I really don't vibe with. I really don't like. I don't enjoy them. Some of them are just outright bad, and I spend a lot of time hating on them. But I'm cautiously optimistic that they can do this. I think it'll be a good way to get the Miner as a killer out there more, and I think if it succeeds, we have a possibility to expand on a franchise that I felt should have always, been much larger than it was. And surely the killer will probably spike in popularity regardless of if the film is good or not, because, it's a good concept. It's an interesting killer. I was confused that he didn't spike when the 2009 reboot came, but then again, the 2006 through 2010 reboot period wasn't really looked on that fondly at the time, and it's been more of like a recent change in views and opinions on a lot of those movies. Like, back in 2010, I would ask people about, the Friday the 13th reboot, because despite probably being too young to have watched it at the time, I did watch it, and all I heard from Friday the 13th fans was that it was bad. And nowadays you ask them, they're like, oh, it's really good, it's one of the best in the series. And I've always kind of felt it was better than the original, at least in my opinion. That's just me. But you go to things like the Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 remake, and that's still looked upon like really badly. Like, it's got its fan base. I think everything has its fan base, and I'm glad that people found something about it, enjoyable, even if I couldn't. Um, but yeah, the 2009 My Bloody Valentine reboot still isn't looked upon very fondly, and I'm not too surprised it didn't spike in popularity after it dropped. But with this new reboot coming from Blumhouse, I'm hoping that the franchise can spike a bit. But yeah, I'd say underrated slasher film of the 80s, My Bloody Valentine, definitely. Alrighty, thank you for those questions. Alright, and now we're going to get into a different segment. This next segment is called Paths of Doom. In this segment, I answer a damning would you rather asked by you guys. No loopholes, no workarounds, no tomfoolery, just a blatant, honest answer. But I don't have to walk these paths alone, honestly. I think I should have some friends. So if you want to join me in answering, you can tag me on Twitter at SlasherDreamPod or at SlasherDreams and tell me what path you chose to walk, whether you chose the same path as me or whether you chose a different path. Tonight's perilous path is brought to us by our good friend Brooks. Thank you at Comic Brooks. I appreciate you asking a question. They asked, would I rather have to survive the Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise or the Death Angels from the Quiet Place franchise? Brooks, I thought we were friends. um, yeah, I'm kind of fucked no matter what. I think for the purpose of this video, I gotta go with I think I gotta go with no, I'm gonna go with Death Angels, because you see with Xenomorphs, they might not kill you. They might take you alive to their hive, and they might try to use your body as like a case to hold a xeno embryo. They're gonna put a face hugger on you, and they're gonna try and make you a host. And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't want to be a xenomorph host. No matter what, no matter who you choose, you're probably going to die. But at least the Death Angels make it quick. I mean, I know I have zero chance of surviving in a world where you can't make sound. I just don't. I know myself. I know I wouldn't make it. But I feel like I could last a little bit longer. Not to mention, as far as we know, a finite amount of Death Angels came to Earth during the invasion. Xenomorphs, you get even one or two on the planet, and your planet's probably fucked. Like, it's sad to say, but Xenomorphs are just a far larger threat. Also, when it comes to Death Angels, you can get on the water, like on a boat or something, and they can't reach you. So there is ways you could survive. It's just getting to the boats quietly, getting to a place with water quietly. That's gonna be your core problem. And out of the two, I'd rather be killed by a Death Angel than a Xenomorph, because one, there's a chance I'm actually just gonna die. I'm not gonna be used as a host for incubation. And two, it's probably gonna be a lot more painless than anything the Xenomorphs would probably try to do to me. But yeah, I think Death Angels are the far safer answer. Probably the easier to survive out of the two because of that whole water factor, but still, I mean, even if you could kill a Xenomorph, the acid blood's probably gonna fuck you over. At least Death Angels, if you manage to kill one, it's gonna stay down and it's not gonna have like a splashback death effect on you. But yeah, thank you for that question, Brooks. And remember, if you want to submit questions for creature questions or submit a Paths of Doom, you simply have to go to Twitter and follow /DreamPod, turn on notifications, and keep an eye out for our submissions posts. Once we see your submissions, we'll write it down and we'll add it to the jar that it belongs in, and we will draw it, and you will get a chance to have your question answered. Keep in mind, you can make multiple submissions. And remember, as stated earlier, If your question or Paths of Doom isn't answered in this video, it could always be answered in another one down the line. So please feel free to ask your questions and know that they will be answered. This is usually where we would have a sponsor segment, because we're kind of towards the midway point of at least this episode. Maybe. It depends on how long I ramble. But yeah, this is typically the area where we do one of our sponsor segments, but we don't have a sponsor. This is our first episode, so instead I just want to take a second to remind you guys, you can follow me at SlasherDreams on Twitter. I'm also on TikTok. My link tree is in my bio, so if you want to follow my other socials, they're there, and you can follow us at SlasherDreamPod. I appreciate the support. Before we get into the next segment, we'll do Song of the Week, where we highlight a song and try to introduce you guys to some jams that maybe you haven't heard, maybe you have heard. This week's Song of the Week is Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, a very popular song amongst horror fans, so I'm sure most of you have heard it. With that being said, the song is incredibly brilliant. It is featured in multiple horror films, including Halloween, which, spoilers, we'll be getting into that in a little bit. But yeah, it is just an absolutely incredible song. My personal favorite song of all time, and if you haven't listened to it, I suggest that you do. It is a very good song. Next up, we're getting into our next segment, and it's time for the question of the day. What question of the day is I'm going to ask all of you a question, and you'll have to tag me on Twitter with the hashtag SlasherDreamsQOTD so I can see all of your answers. Nothing happens if you get it right. It's just a fun little thing, and I hope you'd enjoy it. But the first ever question of the day is this. George A. Romero's Day of the Dead released in what year? Remember to answer on Twitter with the hashtag SlasherDreamsQOTD to show me that you got it right. Don't cheat. Don't use Google. I will know. I won't know, but I will know. And with that, we are going to move on to the one segment that will always be on every single episode, and that is the Slasher Rewind Review. The night's nearly over for us on this episode, so we're going to be getting into our last segment before we go. The Slasher Rewind, where we shine a light on a single slasher flick, highlighting the director and the cast before we get into my thoughts on the film itself. Spoilers and all, you've been warned. We then choose the kill that is deserving of the final cut, and the kill that was dead on arrival. And then at the end, we'll rate the 5 key areas of all slasher flicks: the kills, the effects, the score, the atmosphere, and of course, the slasher themselves, the meat and bones, before finally rating the film overall. For the first episode, I was really struggling to pick for the movie we'd be talking about this time, and I was sure that everybody was going to expect me to talk about Scream 1996. It is such an Ash thing to talk about. I've talked about it to death in everything that I've ever done, and I wanted to pick something that wasn't that, because I wanted to subvert the expectations that had been in place. And I was thinking, and I was like, what movie could I pick? And when it finally hit me, I'd never felt so stupid. Because what better movie to pick here than a movie that quite literally started the 80s, the late 70s to, throughout the entirety of the 80s wave of slasher films. So, without further ado, we are going to be talking about John Carpenter's 1978 film, Halloween. Just an absolutely legendary film. It was not easy to choose this over others until it hit me. Like, I was genuinely dancing with the idea of covering things like Black Christmas, 1974, even Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, covering something more recent that's kind of been more topical. But when it finally hit me that I should cover this, it stuck like a cooked noodle on a wall. Like it hit just right. A movie that is just absolutely brilliant and innovative for the slasher subgenre. And I deeply consider Michael the king of slashers. I know a lot of people give that title to Jason, but for me, I consider Michael the king of slashers. Made in 1978, directed by John Carpenter, and produced by Deborah Hill on a budget of just $300,000. Halloween was the titan that gave inspiration to even characters like Jason. Hitting theaters October 25th of 1978. It starred Jamie Lee Curtis in her first ever film role, Donald Pleasance, and of course Nick Castle as the iconic Shape Michael Myers. Halloween 1978 was the start of something very large among the slasher subgenre. We had films before. Some people would argue that Black Christmas was kind of like the first major slasher film. Some people argue that Psycho 1960 is the kind of like the first slasher. And of course, people kind of point to Bubba from Leatherface, Bubba Jebediah, whatever the fuck his name is, depending on the timeline, from Texas Chainsaw Massacre as kind of like the first quote unquote iconic slasher. And you've just got this huge amount of respect for all of those characters, but then you get to Michael and you really see that Michael kind of changed the way people viewed the subgenre. The late 70s, throughout the entire 1980s, were spent trying to capture the same level of success and the feeling that Halloween 1978 really created. And while so many people tried to capture and emulate that feeling and that success, very, very few actually managed to capture like the feel, and even less people managed to capture the success. We're gonna get kind of spoiler heavy when we talk about the movie in its own right, but yeah. Halloween, in my eyes, is a masterpiece, like one of the greatest slasher films of all time. Michael's first outing isn't even necessarily his most violent. I actually think this is the least amount of kills he gets in a single movie throughout the franchise. But in my eyes, Halloween 1978 is the most terrifying. It just has like this haunting presence. It makes every single dark corner throughout the entirety of the movie feel unsafe. I mean, growing up, the slasher that scared me the most was Michael Myers. Jason was a force of nature, but his backstory was like so sad and so sympathetic that I found myself feeling bad for him more than I was feeling scared of him. Freddy creeped me out, but the movies always felt like super goofy, and I was more busy kind of laughing at how silly certain things looked in the films to be afraid of him. But Michael fucking terrified me. He had no real reason for what he was doing at the time that I watched Halloween 1978, because I had never watched, the sequels at that time. I went into this movie and I saw this person with zero reason to be doing what he was doing the most evil and horrific shit. And it creeped me out. He was just this completely emotionless thing hiding in the darkness or in the background of so many shots. And I think that Loomis really really hit it on the head. He says, "I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no consciousness, no understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes." And that's exactly what Michael is at this point in the franchise. Before you diverge into timelines and he's got this Celtic curse, or until you go off to like whatever the fuck the H2O timeline was trying to do, and you get these reasons for why he does what he does. He was just a very disturbed individual in a very disturbingly uncanny mask that could lurk in the shadows with an impossibly terrifying stealth to him. A silence that made every room feel quiet even when there was noise in it. Like it was just this complete absence of any hope anytime he was on screen. Um and that's why I always thought about him as like the slasher. He wasn't some person that I felt bad for or that I thought looked goofy. He was just this unstoppable force with this unquenchable thirst to just stalk and kill for no reason other than it's what he wished to do. Of course, the sequels, as I said, would establish motives, but I can never forget the feeling of watching Halloween 1978 and just experiencing this film with this Michael as nothing more than the boogeyman, just doing what boogeymen do. Like he's just pure and utter evil. And I do love that the David Gordon Green trilogy. I know I I talk so highly about this and I love it so much. I genuinely believe they took it back to that. They took it back to that this guy isn't here for his sister. In this timeline, Laurie isn't his sister. He's not controlled by a cult. He's not controlled by some unsatiable urge to murder his family. He is just a sick, evil, disturbing bastard. A pure boogeyman. Unstoppable in nature. Unempathetic. Uncaring. Slaughtering his way through Haddonfield. And I really loved that about the David Gordon Green trilogy. We're going to get into the final cut. The final cut is the kill that I feel was the best in the film. The final cut is essentially just the kill that maybe it was good for a specific reason. Maybe it was a memorable performance. Maybe it was an awesome and creative idea for a kill. Maybe it was the emotional impact of it. Or maybe it was just a showcase of brilliant practical effects. When it comes to this movie, the final kill has got to be the death of Bob Sims. I think it's one of the most iconic kills in the Halloween franchise. The scene is set perfectly as Michael just fucking lunges forward from the darkness and grabs Bob by the throat before lifting him off the ground with one hand and stabbing him so hard with a kitchen knife that Bob is physically pinned to the wall. It is such an awesome idea. And Michael's little head tilt is such an iconic aspect of this kill because it gives you like that slight dip into what little like thought Michael probably has about what he does, almost like he's admiring his work. It's such a fun and an interesting kill. But yeah, now we're gonna pick the kill that was dead on arrival. The next kill was dead on arrival. The dead on arrival kill of the movie is the kill that did not work. Some movies have multiple of these, but I'm always just gonna pick the one that was just the most unimpressive or the most boring. A lot of these will probably be like off-screen kills, primarily kills where we like never see the kill or even the body, but maybe they get like confirmed dead. Maybe we see the kill, but bad acting or effects are like so laughably bad that we just can't help but be unmoved. A good example of that would be like Friday the 13th Part 4. The "he's killing me" kill. It makes me laugh every time, and I can't take it seriously. Not only is like the full kill off screen, but the fact that he just keeps screaming "he's killing me" just gets me. But yeah, there is a chance that off-screen kills can still get like the final cut. If we see an aftermath of the kill that is memorable, kind of like Olivia in Scream 4, where we see her get thrown through the window, but we don't actually see what Charlie does. But when we see the aftermath, it is so memorable and so gory and so like well done in terms of effects that it's still deserving of something like that. But most of the time, a lot of these will probably be off-screen kills. I know that's a little cheap, but just a forewarning about this segment. Halloween has one off-screen kill, and it is most definitely getting this episode's Dead on Arrival title. The mechanic's death is not only off-screen, but the body itself is shown for 2 seconds. I literally timed it. It is shown for 2 seconds, and it is literally just there in the grass. It looks like somebody spilled a little fake blood on the guy's chest and was just like, shit, yeah, we'll call it a day. And Loomis doesn't even see the body. He sees the clothes on the ground, he picks them up, he looks around worried, and then he just runs off. We never get like a memorable discovery of the body. The effects on the body are non-existent. As a matter of fact, I actually had to look up the cause of death for the character because it was not apparent to me. But yeah. Overall, the kill's just lackluster. We don't see it. The body discovery isn't memorable. It's just there. And I think that's kind of like the point of the scene. I don't think Loomis is supposed to really see it, but like there's just nothing about this kill that is memorable. With that, we'll move on to rating the 5 sections of the movies. We will start with the kills. Michael secured a total of 7 in Halloween 1978, 2 of which are sadly dogs, but 5 of which are humans, with only one of the human kills being off-screen, which of course was the mechanic. It seems as though Michael's preferred method of killing is preferring to choke victims, even characters like Annie and Bob that were killed by the knife were choked prior to being stabbed, with Linda being the only character that actually does fully get strangled to death, and the mechanic apparently was bludgeoned to death, was the cause of death that I saw was listed for him. And of course you have Judith being stabbed when Michael was younger, but I don't necessarily see how he would have done his seemingly favorite motive in this movie. The kills are done in an eerie manner that more relies on the atmosphere and the incredible build-up. There's a little bit of a lack of variety to them, so overall I think we'll give the kills in Halloween 1978 a 3 out of 5. Not because like they're bad, just the kills themselves are a little bit repetitive, and it's just kind of there's better in the franchise when it comes to moving forward. For the time, it was still really good. Like I think that was a time where kills weren't too graphic. Like how even the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't that gory. So yeah. Next up, we're going to move to the effects. This is the part where we usually move on to rating the effects of the movie, but 1978's Halloween was purposefully devoid of things like gore. It instead decided to rely on its atmosphere and build-up, and its sound design, which, you know, John Carpenter's sound design was absolutely flawless. So for this episode, I'm not going to be rating the effects purely because this movie really doesn't have any, and that was done on purpose. But speaking of sound design and score, we'll rate the score next. Halloween 1978 was entirely composed by director John Carpenter. Its theme would arguably go on to be the most iconic horror theme of all time, and one of my personal favorites, honestly. The music in the film just adds to this incredibly unsettling feeling that you already have, with slow, droning, borderline repetitive notes that just hang on, and the more you hear the pressing of these keys, the more you start to feel like this pit in your stomach, and you just know Michael's near every time that theme plays. With the theme of the film serving both as the theme of the franchise and the killer itself for the entirety of the franchise. It's just such an iconic sound. The film does feature songs like Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, which was our song of the day, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, it's my personal favorite song of all time, so I'm a little biased. So if the already incredible score from John Carpenter hadn't earned it to 5 out of 5, having a song like Don't Fear the Reaper would have pushed it there. But with music covered, it's time to get into the atmosphere of the film. The atmosphere of Halloween 1978 is its strongest point. It really drags you into the film in a lot of ways that movies at the time just didn't. And it seems like movies of today simply can't. It's got a strong start with the first person point of view, kind of putting us into Michael's perspective. And during the moment of his first kill at that, which kind of gives us a preview of the weight of what Michael does. And it's done in a way that just, it makes you feel gross. Like, you wish you could just stop what's about to happen, but you know you can't. And then the movie goes about externalizing us from Michael, letting us see over his shoulder as he stalks, or letting him see in the distance from like the character's point of view as he seemingly stalks us through the camera. And we want to stop what he's going to do throughout the events of the film for the most part, but we can't. And I feel like that really adds to the weight of putting us into his point of view at the beginning to show us how he views what he does before externalizing us for the rest of the film and forcing us to watch him do it again and again. It's this methodical and evil way of really connecting the audience to this sense of responsibility for what Michael does, because you're forced to watch him do it from a perspective in which you're seeing through his eyes, and it gives you this icky feeling. And then you just have to watch him do it again and again from the outside. It's such a brilliant way of adding weight to what he does and the characters he does it to. The small suburb setting is supposed to feel like a place of safety and comfort, and the fall time really adds to that sense of comfort. I mean, you've got kids running around in costumes, you got yellow and orange leaves blowing across the street, but we know better at this point. And what is supposed to be like a comfortable setting for a lot of people suddenly becomes like, a nightmare. You could be the character in this movie. And if you really can get into the movie on like that emotional level, the feelings kind of transcend the screen. Like, suddenly you're getting up and you're making sure your doors are locked. You're making sure that your blinds are closed so you can watch this film without feeling watched yourself. And suddenly those of you that can really get into it feel that same discomfort that the characters in the movie should be feeling the more they get like wise to the fact that something's wrong, which sadly not most of them do. Only really Laurie does, and I can only imagine that sense of terror that the character feels. But if you can immerse yourself in the film enough, you could probably get like a slight feeling of that being watched type of atmosphere. The Halloween 1978 atmosphere is just a resounding 5 out of 5. Like, it is one of the most incredible films when it comes to building an atmosphere. But we have one final category for rating before we get into the overall film score. And that is rating the slasher. Now, for this segment, I can only rate the slasher as they are at this point in the franchise. I can't rate them as they were in films prior, or as they will be in films to come. I can only rate them as they are for the movie in which I'm talking about. So if you're like, what do you mean Michael gets like a fucking 2 out of 5 in Halloween Resurrection? He had a 5 out of 5 in this one. It's because in Halloween Resurrection, Michael fucking sucks. And in Halloween 1978, Michael is fucking godly. Like, Michael from the 1978 version of Halloween is a phenomenal slasher with the ability to create nothing short of pure terror and discomfort in both his victims and the viewers alike. I mean, he sits at like the top of the list if you were to make a tier list of the best versions of the Michael Myers character. 1978 Michael is quite literally evil manifest. Like, he is just this absolute titan of the slasher genre. A pure shape of brutality and violence, and a boogeyman that haunts your mind and ensures that you're checking your closet at night. I could not think of a more perfect slasher to have covered for this first episode. And trust me, I was really kicking myself in the ass for taking so long to figure out what film I wanted to cover. 1978 Michael Myers is a definitive 5 out of 5 slasher. With all that said, I think it's time we give Halloween 1978 its official rating. Halloween 1978 is an amazing film. With a firm placement in my top 20 horror films of all time, actually. That being at the number 12 spot. And it being my second favorite Halloween film of all time. With that, I think it's clear that Halloween 1978 gets a 10 out of 10 slasher knives on the slasher scale. And I genuinely think this is one of the greatest horror films and slasher films of all time. But with that, creatures, it looks like our night has come to an end. This is your host, Ashley, reminding you to be kind, rewind, and always keep an ear out for things that go bump in the night. Until next time.